We've all met them. The person who speaks with absolute certainty, even when it's painfully clear they have no idea what they're talking about. They dominate conversations. They offer advice they have no business giving. And somehow they're always so sure of themselves. But here's the strange part. The people who actually do know what they're talking about, they hesitate. They question themselves. They're aware of how much they don't know. Why does this happen? We're diving into the Dunning-Kruger effect, the psychological phenomenon that explains why the less people know, the more convinced they are that they know everything. And by the end of this video, you'll see why confidence isn't always a sign of competence, and why doubt can be the mark of true intelligence. Overconfidence is everywhere. You see it in boardrooms, in politics, on social media, and even in casual conversations with friends. People speaking with total certainty about things they barely understand. And the scary part? They believe they're right. This isn't just a few arrogant individuals acting out. It's a universal psychological phenomenon, one that affects almost everyone at some point. It's not about intelligence, background, or education. It's about how our minds work, and often they work against us. There's a term for this, the Dunning-Kruger effect. But before we get into what that means, consider this. In a survey conducted by researchers, more than 80% of people rated themselves as above-average drivers. Statistically impossible, right? But most people genuinely believe they're better than they are, whether it's driving, intelligence, or decision-making. This is the problem of overconfidence. The less we know about something, the easier it is to overestimate our abilities. And the consequences of this can be dangerous, personally, professionally, and even on a global scale. We'll explore why this happens, what it says about human nature, and how understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect can help you avoid falling into the same trap. So, what exactly is the Dunning-Kruger effect? Simply put, it's a cognitive bias where people with low ability, knowledge, or experience tend to overestimate their competence. In other words, the less you know, the more you think you know. The term comes from two social psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who first described this phenomenon in 1999. Their research was inspired by a story that's as ridiculous as it is fascinating. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in Pittsburgh and robbed them in broad daylight. He didn't wear a mask, didn't have a disguise, and smiled directly at the security cameras. When he was arrested later that night, he was genuinely shocked. His reasoning? He thought that rubbing lemon juice on his face would make him invisible to surveillance cameras. He believed this because lemon juice is used in invisible ink, and he figured it worked the same way on his skin. This bizarre story caught David Dunning's attention. He wondered, how could someone be so incompetent and yet so confident at the same time? Dunning and Kruger designed a series of experiments to test their theory. What they found was striking. People who performed the worst on tests of logic, grammar, and humor consistently rated their own abilities as far higher than they actually were. They didn't just think they were competent, they thought they were excellent. And here's the key insight. Incompetent people often lack the very skills they need to recognize their own incompetence. They're not just wrong, they're wrong about being wrong. This isn't about intelligence, it's about self-awareness. Without enough knowledge or skill in a particular area, people can't accurately judge how much they don't know. And that's where overconfidence comes from. One of the strangest things about knowledge is this. The less you know, the simpler everything seems. When you only have a surface-level understanding of something, it feels like you've got it all figured out. Things appear black and white, clear-cut, easy to grasp. But as you learn more, you start to realize just how complex the world really is. This is where the illusion of knowledge takes hold. You think you know, because you don't know enough to realize what you're missing. And here's something even more dangerous. Most people have what psychologists call a cognitive bias blind spot. It's easy to spot flaws in other people's thinking. We notice when they're overconfident, when they're wrong, when they're fooling themselves. But when it comes to our own thinking, we're often blind. We trust our judgments, even when they're completely off. And we rarely question our own assumptions. Socrates understood this over 2,000 years ago. He said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." In other words, the more you understand, the more you realize how little you actually know. There's a concept sometimes called the valley of ignorance. Imagine you're standing at the bottom of a huge mountain. But because you're so low down, you can't even see how tall the mountain is. You think you've reached the top when you've barely left the ground. That's where most people are when they first start learning something. At the very bottom, but completely unaware of how far there is to go. This is the illusion of knowledge. And it's why overconfidence can be a trap. One that's hard to escape unless you develop the humility to recognize it. Here's one of the great ironies of human psychology. The less someone knows, the more certain they tend to be. And the more someone does know, the more they tend to doubt themselves. Ignorance breeds certainty. Wisdom breeds doubt. This is why the loudest voices are often the least informed. And the quiet ones, the thoughtful, reflective people, often keep their insights to themselves. Because the more you understand something, the more you become aware of its complexity. You realize that there are no simple answers, that there's always more to learn, more to consider, and more that could go wrong. This doubt is sometimes mistaken for weakness, but it's actually a sign of deeper understanding. It's also why many highly intelligent, capable people suffer from something called imposter syndrome. They underestimate themselves. They question their abilities. They feel like frauds, even when they're highly competent. Why? Because they're painfully aware of what they don't know. They see the full picture, and they know how vast and complicated it is. Bertrand Russell said it best. The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt. And this isn't just poetic philosophy, it's rooted in how our brains work. Smarter people engage in something called metacognition, thinking about their own thinking. They step back and question their own judgments. They ask, "Am I right about this?" They can see the gray areas, the exceptions, the things that don't quite fit. And because of that, they move cautiously. They doubt. They hesitate. Meanwhile, those with little understanding often charge ahead, completely unaware of their blind spots. This is the dangerous difference between the confidence of stupidity and the doubt of intelligence. This isn't just a harmless quirk of human psychology. The Dunning-Kruger effect shapes the world we live in, often with serious consequences. In politics, we often see leaders who are completely unqualified, yet they speak with absolute conviction. They make bold promises, offer simple solutions to complex problems, and appeal to people's desire for certainty. And because they sound confident, people trust them, even when they have no idea what they're doing. The same thing happens in business. Overconfident incompetence frequently rises to leadership positions. People who are better at sounding capable rather than being capable climb to the top. They dominate meetings, make reckless decisions, and ignore the advice of more cautious, qualified experts. And on social media, it's even worse. The loudest voices, the ones shouting the simplest, most extreme opinions, get the most attention. Fake experts, conspiracy theorists, and influencers with no real understanding of what they're talking about gain huge followings. They spread misinformation because they don't know enough to realize they're wrong. Or worse, they don't care. In a world where loudness is mistaken for truth and certainty is mistaken for competence, the Dunning-Kruger effect becomes dangerous. It rewards confidence over competence. It elevates the most cocksure, not the most qualified. And it drowns out the voices of people who actually understand how complicated things really are. The result? Bad leadership, terrible decisions, and a society that often confuses ignorance for strength and wisdom for weakness. So how do you avoid falling into the Dunning-Kruger trap? It starts with intellectual humility. Stay skeptical of your own views. Question your assumptions. Remind yourself that no matter how much you know, there's always more to learn. Confidence without reflection is dangerous. Understand this simple truth. The more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Make lifelong learning a habit. Read, listen, ask questions, stay curious. And just as important, surround yourself with people who challenge you. Not those who tell you you're always right, but those who force you to think harder, reconsider your beliefs, and admit when you're wrong. And be cautious of overconfidence, both in yourself and in others. Someone speaking with certainty isn't always someone speaking with truth. True experts often express doubt. They use words like, "It depends," or "I could be wrong." Don't mistake that for weakness. It's often a sign they actually understand what they're talking about. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't something you can eliminate entirely. But by staying humble, curious, and self-aware, you can protect yourself from its worst effects. Doubt isn't a weakness. It's the beginning of wisdom. The Dunning-Kruger effect reminds us that confidence alone doesn't equal competence. In fact, the people who question themselves, who hesitate, who admit they don't have all the answers, are often the ones who understand things the best. Because certainty without knowledge is a dangerous thing. It closes minds, it leads to bad decisions, and it drowns out the voices that actually deserve to be heard. So the next time someone seems too sure of themselves, pause. And more importantly, pause when you feel too certain. Ask yourself, what am I missing? What don't I know yet? Because wisdom starts when we admit we don't know everything. And that's where real learning begins. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been completely certain about something, only to realize later how wrong you were? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you found this video helpful, consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell. It helps the channel, and it keeps you updated when we explore more ideas like this.